Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulihil Kareem. Wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to all of our viewers. I'd like to welcome you all to this very special and important panel discussion organized by Redbridge Islamic Center with the title, Do Black Muslims Matter? A frank discussion around anti-Black racism within Muslim communities. We are joined by a very special array of speakers today, and I'm not going to talk for too much longer because I want them to get right into it, but I'll just briefly introduce the 6 speakers. So we have 3 lay members of the panel. We have 2 brothers who join us from the Lewisham community. One of them is Brother Abdul Khaliq, and another is Mukhtar. Both of them have been very active in their local communities with youth work. And we also have our own local resident to Redbridge, Dr. Ahmed Lawal, who again is very experienced and active in the local community. He's also a local GP. We also have 3 of our distinguished ulama, our imams. So first of all, just to mention Imam Shakeel Begg, he's currently Imam at Lewisham Islamic Center. He's also done a stint at the Redbridge Islamic Center as well as one of our imams some years back. We are also joined by Imam Swaleh, one of the imams of Greenwich Islamic Center. And last but not least, we also have Imam Yunus Dudhwala, who is currently the head chaplain at Barts Health NHS Trust, which I believe is the largest NHS trust in the UK. So we're going to start by inviting each of the 6 speakers to talk for approximately 10 minutes each. And the second hour after that, we will open it up for a bit of a discussion. I may throw a question out there and ask the guests to discuss that. So first of all, I'm going to invite Abdul to speak for 10 minutes. Bismillah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
So you can hear me, yeah? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad innaka hamid. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka hamid. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad innaka hamidun Ibrahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad innaka hamidun Majid. Allahumma barak ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad innaka hamidun Majid. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters. I'm a bit nervous, sorry, being in this conference call, but barakallahu feek for having me here. And I'd like to commend the brothers for this topic, because it's an uncomfortable topic. For everyone, it can be uncomfortable, and speaking truths that can be uncomfortable for me, for Black people, for non-Black people, and speaking about things that are prominent in different communities, and it takes brothers to be honest and open. So I commend the brothers for even having this lecture and facing these issues. It is quite an unfortunate and sad topic to be discussing.
Was there a question? Yeah, Jazakallah khairan. Brother, if you could just tell us, just very briefly, about any, if you could give us your own experiences. I understand you came to Islam, you reverted to Islam, and I wanted to just ask you to talk about any uncomfortable, negative experiences you may have faced from the Muslim community, the non-Black Muslim community. That may have been, blatant racism, or may have been anything just, uncomfortable. If there's anything that you can tell us, just so that we have some awareness about, the kind of issues that you have faced.
First of all, what I'd like to mention, it's not necessarily anything personal, first and foremost. It's the understanding about racism amongst Muslims. Because there's this idea when you come into Islam, and you know, when the brothers give dawah and when we speak to different brothers of different races, the first thing, if we speak about racism, you know, we hear the slogan, there's no racism in Islam. And alhamdulillah, we understand that Allah's deen is perfect and there's no racism in Islam. And it's kind of like a cop-out that doesn't address the situations that we as a community or different communities face. So we say Islam doesn't have racism, so we don't need to discuss racism. And I found that to be quite false quite early. I've been a Muslim for 20 years now, alhamdulillah. And quite early, I found it to be false. I do have to commend the masjid, Lewisham Masjid, because it's a very mixed community masjid with brothers of all different races. And within the masjid itself, you'd never feel that kind of racism or exclusion in that environment, in that community, or in that masjid. So I never experienced anything around the masjid, but immediately you would hear from different brothers of different races, negative things pertaining to Black people in the deen. And I remember the first thing I heard was a hadith that a brother was rebuting, and saying that there's many false hadith about Black people. And he mentioned a hadith about not inviting Black people to your home because they will eat all your food and sleep and steal your women, and they're lazy. And you know, when you hear these things early, I mean, straight away you wonder where would these come from? Why would anyone attribute lies or racist statements to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And I understood that these existed. I never ever heard them or read them myself, but I understood that false hadith and false narratives and narrations of Black people were around in different communities and being circulated either through culturalistic teachings or sometimes even religious teachings. So that was my first experience with racism, just overhearing that there are racist things being said or being circulated. I would then say, coming outside of my community and going into different communities, Islamic communities, predominantly Asian communities, it was completely different to the Lewisham experience. They weren't very mixed. They were predominantly Asian. And I completely understand that a lot of racism comes from ignorance and prejudices that aren't necessarily malicious. And some people come from backgrounds where they are not around any other race besides their own. And because of that, their only idea of another race would be what they've seen. And if they've only seen negative things from a certain particular group of people, then they're going to have them negative connotations. So I understand we all have small prejudices and we all have preconceived ideas of people we don't understand. But sometimes it can be malicious. I've overheard things that have been quite malicious and derogatory, and it leads me to ask the question, where does this come from if we're all Muslims?
Jazakallah khairan, Abdul Khaliq, for your contribution. If there wasn't anything else that you wanted to add at this time, we'll move on to the next speaker, and obviously you'll have a chance to discuss things afterwards.
Okay.
I'm going to ask Brother Ahmed to join now, so I'm just going to invite you to join the discussion.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. As Brother Abdul Khaliq was saying, Thank you. You have to praise the brothers for having the idea of having this discussion, which is certainly topical, and certainly a discussion that many people will find difficult and will find uncomfortable. But the issue of discrimination, the issue of racism, the issue of prejudice amongst Muslims is not a new one. This is an issue that has existed for hundreds of years and has been dealt with by different scholars in the past. And as the brother Abdul Khaliq was saying, some of this arises from ignorance and a lack of experience and a lack of interaction. And some of it is more arrogance and it is more malicious. But for each Black person, the experience of racism or prejudice will be different. For some of us, it's pretty innocuous, in the sense that, to be honest, it doesn't really matter that you don't know that we're not all from Jamaica. Okay, even Jamaica, the West Indies is not just Jamaica. It's Barbados. It's Trinidad, Tobago. It's St. Lucia, Antigua, Grenada. The fact that other Muslims don't know that Africa, okay, every Black Muslim that you meet is not a convert. And that question always comes, are you a convert? Not everybody is. In fact, Islam was in Africa before it was in Asia. The companions of the Prophet ﷺ made hijrah to Africa, to Abyssinia, before they went anywhere near Asia. The fact that Muslims are from Nigeria and Ghana and Sudan and Somalia and Kenya and Chad and Ivory Coast and so many Muslim countries that I can't even mention, that's ignorance. And that doesn't matter. The fact that we have all, probably most, have suffered what's I think fashionable to call microaggressions. So the sight of a Black person in the United Kingdom is not unusual. Okay? So most people have seen Black people in this country, unless you live in a village somewhere. And admittedly, the Muslim population in this country is roughly 5% of the population, and Black Muslims make up roughly 10% of that 5% population. But it's difficult and it's intimidating as a young person to walk into a masjid and have every single face turn to watch you as you walk through the masjid. Now, I understand curiosity, and again, that's what I'm saying, this is about ignorance, but this is difficult for a person to feel that actually they are being singled out. And this is the experience of a lot of Black people when they walk into masajid. Black people aren't that strange to be looked at and stared at as they come into the masjid. Okay, that's one thing. Again, the assumption that we are all called Bilal is, again, a little bit, I know it's ignorance, but the first time that you're asked, it's fine. The second time you're asked, it's fine. But you know, the 10th, the 20th, the 30th, the 40th time, it gets a bit much. You know, the ignorance, as if like Bilal ibn Rabah radiallahu anh was the only Muslim in Islam. What people have forgotten, Wahshi. People have forgotten Barakah, Ayman, the foster mother of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, a Black woman. People have forgotten the first of the martyrs in Islam was Sumayya radiyallahu ta'ala anha. So this, yes, there's some ignorance there, but there's sort of some arrogance there, which causes a problem as well. Now, it's not upon necessarily the generality of the Muslims to know about the famous black people throughout Islamic history about, yes, okay, everybody knows Mansa Musa of Mali, but they don't know about the Sokoto Caliphate in Nigeria, Uthman Dan Fodio. They don't know about him. That's fine, that's ignorance. But the point about it is that we need to get beyond this. One of the major signs, one of the major problems that shows kind of what we call asabiyya, the kind of the prejudice that we have between each other, are the two things that people in general tend to hold precious are their money and their children, okay? And if you look at our communities, we don't find black people, i.e. black Muslims and other non-Muslims, I'm making a generalization, but we don't find them going into business together. And we certainly struggle with finding them marrying into each other. Now, this is a bit of a strange thing for me to say. My wife is Bangladeshi. And I've had interesting conversations with people where, because I've been married for a while, I speak some Sylheti. So I've had discussions with people. They say, "Oh, that's very strange. You speak Sylheti. Why do you speak Sylheti?" Because my wife is Sylheti. And so I've had comments. How did that happen? And my response is usually because Muslims marry Muslims. I think. Again, ignorance, but there's some arrogance in there. Okay. There's, in general, my experience of being black, being Muslim has been good. But don't get me wrong. I'm talking about, for the main part, my experience of this has been microaggressions. I have enough confidence behind me. I have enough knowledge behind me. I have enough support behind me to not make it a problem. And I have enough friends, both black, Asian, Arab, white, that actually my friendship group, Muslim, non-Muslim, is fine. It's not a problem. But for those who lack the confidence, or who lack the experience, or who lack the knowledge, or who lack the support, this arrogance and ignorance is something of a problem. I think that's my 10 minutes.
Ask Brother Mukhtar to join us now. So if you could, for up to 10 minutes, inshallah.
Hear me, yeah?
Yep, can hear you.
Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala rasulillah, wa ba'd. Alhamdulillah, the brothers before me have made some good points, and kind of makes it difficult for me to say anything that I was going to say as well. But there are loads of different angles that you can come from. So us three are not going to be able to cover all of the different angles. So for those who are viewing, we can't represent everybody and everybody's individual situation that they may have gone through. But we're trying to just get some points across and out there.
Mukhtar, sorry to interrupt you. There's a little bit of interruption on your side, the audio. I don't know if there's something.
There's nothing here. Is that okay now? Is that okay?
Still a bit of interruption. Is there another device you have?
To use?
No, in terms of, is there something else on? Sometimes that creates a bit of an echo.
No, there's nothing on.
Okay, that's fine, inshallah. Just try and speak into the mic as much as possible, inshallah. We should be able to hear you.
Yeah. So what I was just saying is that basically it's difficult to mention all of the scenarios that some of the black Muslims may have gone through. But we're trying to just get a general picture and idea across of what goes on. Personally, the brother before, mashallah, you mentioned this word microaggressions, and I wouldn't have been able to put it a better way, because with me personally, it's been those, and it hasn't been anything blatant. So You know, and I think people that have these prejudice ideas, they know who to display them to openly, and then again in this micro-aggressive type of a way. You know what I mean? Yeah, he mentioned it being ignorance as well, and I do definitely agree with that. And ignorance on both levels. Ignorance, you know, where, you know, there's ignorance sliding into, you know, ignorance / arrogance, and then you've got ignorance being the absence of knowledge, the absence of understanding. So personally, you know, going into the masjid, and I have to say, it has been from the Asian community that I've had these microaggressions from, where you would go into the masjid, and approaching the masjid, you may see an uncle, and you give him salam, and he replies with a mumble, like, a mumble. It's not even clear what he's saying or anything like that, and you think, okay, mashallah, he tried. I accept it and I leave it. But then when we enter the masjid, he's got 4K quality, HD quality voice when he's speaking to his, you know, counterparts. You know what I mean? And what do I think when that happens? And when it happens, you know, more than once, happens all the time. You could be leaving the masjid, and subhanAllah, somebody will come and ask you if you're Muslim. You know, subhanAllah, I just prayed dhuhr. I did just pray. I even prayed sunnah. I even prayed my sunnahs after everything, you know. And, you know, are you Muslim? You know, again, the brother before, he touched on it. Not every black Muslim is a revert, you know. So when he's saying, are you a Muslim? Are you a convert? Are you married? Where's your wife from? Where are you from? Is your wife Muslim? All of these questions are weird, because when I look at my brothers who are not from my ethnicity, I don't think to say, okay, are they reverts? Are they converts? Who are they married to? All of these things here. Again, like you say, it could be an ignorance, and it could be this type of them being inquisitive, just inquisitive questions, just asking, just to find out. But look, I can sit here and I can raise these issues, yeah, and I can raise these issues. I can say this and I can say that, but none of these things are going to change when we have the segregation that we have in the Muslim communities. So when, you know, the brother Abdul Khaliq, he mentioned that going to Asian masjids. Now that might not sit right with you, brother Omar, as a you know, aesthetically to me, you look Asian, yeah. So as an Asian brother, that might not sit well with you, or you might be okay with that. But what we mean by that is by a predominantly Asian community, and with the committee being fully Asian, not having anyone else of any, just not being diverse at all. And when we're talking about a masjid, a center for the Muslims to attend, you know, for ibadah, for, you know, for other, you know, communal activities, I struggle to find it possible for such masajid to be able to cater for people like you. You know what I mean? And others as well. You know what I mean? But it's just, when there's just, everyone's got the same idea, saying the same thing, and there's no diversity, there's nothing. So there's things like that. And, you know, we could put some rules in the masjid. You know, we could put some bizarre type of rules where every, every non-black has got to have a black person standing next to them in the rows, and all of these weird types of suggestions, yeah. But that's not going to change anything, because this racism is a mindset. You get where I'm coming from? So we can have some rules, we can have some laws change and X, Y, Z, but if we're not trying to change the mindset and the understanding of what's actually going on, then all of us here are wasting our time. And, you know, like even in the beginning, you know, and excuse me, I don't know if you know, I don't mean to embarrass anybody, but, you know, the title of the this discussion today, do black Muslims matter? I mean, even that I was a bit uncomfortable. I understand why, you know, after raising my issue with it, I understand why the brothers have used it. But, you know, as Muslims, and I'll just say the point that I raised, I said, as Muslims, us all being Muslims, we don't say, you know, does the Sunnah matter? Is the Sharia important? We don't say that. You know where I'm coming from? So we don't say that. So then when we say, do black Muslims matter? There's a suggestion that black Muslims don't matter. And then I'm here representing, putting my hand up saying, actually, we do. That's belittling to me. And even to the word matter. I was having a discussion with somebody before, with my cousin before, and was talking about this word matter. It seems like, you've got a main, you've got your meal, you've got your meat, maybe you've got some rice, and then you've got a little salad, like some coleslaw or something. It's like we're applying to be coleslaw. We're just trying to be some little small thing on the plate. You understand? And, do we matter? Actually, we're all the same. So what do you mean, do we matter? Does it matter? All of this matter. I don't even like that word matter. So at the end of the day, what I believe is that it's an ignorant mindset that needs to be dealt with. And if this mindset isn't, acknowledged by these communities, then they won't be able to change anything. And that's where I stand with that.
Brother Mukhtar. Was there anything else you wanted to add at this point? Or should we? Okay, that's fine. Jazakallah khairan, Mukhtar. I just want to say I do appreciate the frank discussion. And I think what I mentioned to the brothers before is that we do want to talk about things that are uncomfortable. I suppose just to clarify from our side, when we chose this title, from our point of view, from our point of view, the title was, do we truly believe as a community that black Muslims matter? And, it goes without saying that black Muslims matter as much as every other Muslim. But, regardless of that, I do take on your feedback. And, this is, like I said, this is a learning process for everyone here as well. So Jazakallah khairan. Do is bring on Imam Shakeel Begg to speak next. So I'm just going to invite you now, inshallah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashraf al-anbiya al-mursaleen. Nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een amma ba'd. Praise belongs to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, and peace and blessings of Allah be upon all the prophets of Allah and the last of the messengers, the Imam of the messengers, the best of the messengers, our beloved, Allah Ta'ala's beloved Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sallam. Brothers, sisters, firstly to thank Brother Umar, Dr. Umar, and the team at Red Bridge Islamic Center for, organizing this. And while the topic is quite relevant in society today, because what's happening in the murder of George Floyd, very few actually Muslim communities in Masajid have actually organized this, very few. So I think let's commend RIC, Red Bridge Islamic Center, inshallah, and the team there for organizing this and hosting this. And likewise, our guest speakers, Brother Mukhtar, Dr. Ahmed Lawal, Brother Abdul, Khaliq, Sheikh Swaleh, Sheikh Yunus, inshallah, for taking part, inshallah, and inshallah giving us benefit and wisdom. So inshallah, very brief, brothers and sisters. Firstly, inshallah, Brother Mukhtar, Brother Ahmed, Brother Abdul Khaliq Ahmed, Dr. Ahmed used the word, was it microaggression, which Mukhtar also kind of like mentioned. And I want to touch on that very briefly. So, and I've been having discussions with Abdul Khaliq literally every week, every few days, we'll have some sort of discussion on this topic. And with Mukhtar, I've had a discussion on this topic. So, I personally think, when you use the term microaggression, you are actually from a different generation of brothers who are black Muslims that came into the deen at a time where, your hearts were so pure that even when you came across negativity, you see it as something minor. Yeah, and that's why you use the word microaggression. Yeah, and now we have 10 years after, let's say, Dr. Ahmed, Ahmed's born within a Muslim family, but Abdul Khaliq and Mukhtar, a generation of youngsters come to the deen with a different mindset. And when they see something which is negative and racist, they want to call it out straight away. And saying this, I remember having a discussion with Abdul Khaliq. And Abdul Khaliq, he said to me, he had an issue with somebody in Birmingham, a Muslim, Pakistani Muslim. And the Pakistani Muslim said to him, Allah Ta'ala and I don't know if you remember this, Abdul Khaliq, even when you said it to this on a phone discussion, he said to you, Allah Almighty has made black people to go to Jahannam. Even on the phone conversation, you cannot brush it aside. You know what? People are just ignorant. Yeah. That term, Dr. Ahmed, that you mentioned, microaggression, but this is not micro. This is something now major. And then, you know, the same brother who said to you, or he was calling the N-word to your family members in Birmingham, and your family members called you up to say, Abdul Khaliq, you're a Muslim. This guy's a Muslim, and he's calling us the N-word. And then you went to speak to him and saying, what are you doing, brother? And he said, well, there's no issue, and he was still using it. To me, that's not micro, that's major. Now, not last year, the year before, inshallah, we had this discussion on kind of like, you know, the black community or Black History Month. And Abdul Khaliq, your friend Abdullah was there. Abdullah was on the panel, myself, Imam Ashraf, and we had a sister with us, a sister Basira. And in that discussion, a mother was there. So she really opened up. She said, look, my son goes to a Muslim school in East London. Now, if you say East London, Tower Hamlets, then most of the schools are 70-80% Muslim anyway. But there's a private Muslim school. The son comes to our youth club, and he's never mentioned this to me. And he's been coming to our youth club for years. Yeah, and the family are from Uganda. The son's born here. So the mum said he goes to this private Muslim school, and the kids call him the N-word. I said, Subhanallah. I even told the mum, let me go to the school. Let me visit the school and do an assembly for the kids on racism. So that's not microaggression. That's blatant aggression. So my main point is, initially, brothers and sisters who are listening, there is a problem. Yeah, that problem is quite blatant and major. And while some of our older brothers and sisters, many sisters, I've had about 4 or 5 discussions with sisters from our community, and the same thing. Because many of them are just locally, we've never seen it. No, it's okay. There's a strong sisterhood. They haven't been outside. But again, these sisters from a different generation. If they are to see it, they kind of brush it aside. You know what? It's something minor. But there's a generation who see it and are calling it out. Sheikh Swaleh, for example, Sheikh Swaleh is from Kenya. So I'm from Kenya as well. When I first started kind of like praying and stuff, I went to kind of like, I was about 18. I went to visit my grandmother in Kenya, in Eastleigh. And after Jum'ah, pray Jum'ah in the masjid, everybody's there, it's quite mixed. Jum'ah finishes, and some of the young brothers had some food. Yeah, so they said, look, join us. So I joined them. I'm the only non-indigenous black person joining food, and they're all, you know, maybe 20, 25 indigenous Kenyans or Africans and so on. So I'm eating like it's nothing. And I'm coming from London, again, the same scenario, Abdul Khaliq, that you mentioned, you know, we're all one, it's Islam, there's no racism. So I'm eating innocently, and I get a tap on my shoulder from different Sheikh Swaleh ethnic communities. From the Asian community, somebody would come, you're not supposed to be sitting there. I'm like, why? No. It doesn't look right. This is not right. Can you go? From the Arab, Yemeni individual, Sheikh Swaleh, you're not supposed to be sitting there. From the Somali community, you're not supposed to be sitting there. If that is not kind of like blatant, you know, racist, what is it? Yeah, and that's why you'll find in countries like maybe Kenya, Uganda, where a lot of Asians have been there, never integrated, or maybe having businesses, making money, sending money abroad, eventually the African indigenous community started to turn on them and so on. So I think my first point is, brothers and sisters, very important, it is a problem. Yeah, and the point, Mukhtar, do Black Lives Matter? It's a question mark. It's a question mark. Yeah. Might not agree with the title. It's like trying to say, look, within some Muslim communities, look, people don't see it as serious. It is serious. Of course, they matter. They're not a side thing. They're part of the Muslim community and the Ummah and so on. The second point is in terms of us listening to our community members. If we are a family, if we have that unity, there should not be a black brother or a black sister or anyone else. There might be white brothers and sisters in our communities that feel sometimes alienated because nobody's giving them salam or nobody speaks to them in English. We should be able to hear them out. And if they are saying, look, I'm feeling a certain way, I want you to address this, then we should listen to them and be able to address them. And the third and final point is in terms of, and this I've had discussion with Mukhtar and Abdul Khaliq, we don't want disunity and separation. Yeah, we do not want disunity and separation. That is not a solution. Where community members start saying, And after this discussion, when I said, look, you can't do something separate as a black community. And people have said, well, wait, you know what? Pakistanis have their own thing sometimes. Pakistani community centers, Bengali community centers, Egyptian community centers. Why are you telling us no then? And yes, correct. People are doing this. But Allah Ta'ala is telling us, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Hold on together to the rope of Allah Ta'ala, do not be divided. Allah Ta'ala is telling us, إِنَّ هَذِي أُمَّتُكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً وَأَنَا رَبُّكُمْ فَاعْبُدُونَ. Your ummah is one ummah, and I'm your Lord to worship me. The Messenger of Allah is telling us, Al-Muslimu akhul Muslim. The Muslim is a brother and the sister of another Muslim. Did the Messenger of Allah use Arab and Arab? Did he use, this and that, or white and white, or black and black, our brothers and sisters? No. So our message and call should be, we are one ummah. Regardless of your ethnicity, you should feel and be part of our ummah and community. So those are my 3 main points, inshallah.
Jazakallah khairan, Imam Shakeel Begg. Inshallah, we'll obviously come back for a discussion afterwards. But for now, I want to go on to Imam Yunus, and I want to invite him to speak for 10 minutes, inshallah. So I'm just going to unmute you now.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Respected guests, especially Brother Umar, first of all, Jazakallah khair for organizing this very, very important session. And Jazakallah khair to all the brothers who've already spoken, Imam Shakeel, Mukhtar, Ahmed, and also Abdul Khaliq. And when Brother Umar invited me to speak here today, one of the things I said is, I cannot put my hand up and say, I'm a shining example of, integration with the Black Muslims. I haven't had any bad experiences, but I haven't also, I can't, say, look what I've done, this is what I've done, etc., etc. But what I want to bring today is try to understand. The first point is, do Black Lives Matter? I think it's a question, and I think I agree with Shakeel, Imam Shakeel, that it's the reason why the question is there is that the Muslim community behaves in a way that Black lives are not important. Black lives are not, they don't matter. And I think that's why we need to start talking about this and say, yes, the Muslim community might be out there marching for Black Lives Matter, but have you forgotten your Black Muslim brothers and sisters? So I think that's why this discussion is important, and I think the title is important as well. And I think that's where Brother Umar might have brought his title from. Secondly, I was trying to understand, I'm from an Asian background. I've grown up with the Asian community, and my interactions with the Black Muslim community is not as much as it should be, maybe because I live in a predominantly Asian community. And I see the racism. I see the racism against our Black Muslim brothers and sisters. And I've been trying to think about, before coming on here, is what's happened. We've heard, and I can go through all the ahadith and the verses of the Quran, but I don't think people need to be reminded that we are all equal, and we don't need to look at the examples that we have within the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba, the Tabi'een, Tabi'een, and others, illustrious companions, and those who came afterwards. So we don't need those examples because we know that what the Quran says, we know what the Hadith says. So then I'm trying to think what's happened to our predominantly Asian community, and the way we look at maybe the Black Muslim brothers and sisters. So I'm thinking back that the major influx of the Muslim community in the UK came from the Asian subcontinent in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And from Bangladesh, from Pakistan, from India. And that's the majority of the Muslim community that came in 50s, 60s, and 70s. And one of the first things, alhamdulillah, we have to commend them in a way. One of the first things that they did is they started living in areas where they would find their own. Okay, so to make themselves comfortable, to make themselves take themselves away from prejudice or racism, they started to congregate in areas where they would be with their own. So, for example, if you look at Bradford, you've got a large Pakistani community from similar areas from Pakistan. If you go to Whitechapel, you'll find a large Bengali community who are predominantly from particular areas. If you go to Blackburn, Preston, Dewsbury, Batley, you'll find people who are from India, Gujarat, and they're from same areas back there. And one of the first things that they did to preserve their religion was to establish a masjid. And when they established the masjid, they established the masjid based on their commonality. So we can't defend what they did, but we're looking at the history of how it happened. And what they did is those people who are from a Pakistani community, they built a masjid, and they built a masjid for their community. The people from Gujarat, they built a masjid, and they built a masjid for their community. And even within the Gujarati community, I'm from the Gujarati Indian Muslim community, and even there, you've got a split of Baruchi and Surti, and even those mosques are separate. Okay, and then you've got similar within the Pakistani community, you've got similar within the Bengali community, and in this way the mosques were formed, and they the committees were based on tribalism, the committees are based on background, communalism, and if you're Baruchi, then yes, you can have you can be part of the committee, you can be part of the membership. If you're Surti, then you can be part. If you're from Kashmir, then you can be part of this community. That's what happened historically. And it's not right. It's not right. And unfortunately, it has continued because that generation of Muslim community is still around. Now, the education that should have happened at that time hasn't happened. The education that should happen now has still not happened within our Muslim community. So when our Somali or Nigerian or Jamaican or West Indian Muslims start coming in those masjids, they will feel uncomfortable. And they shouldn't feel uncomfortable because they are a minority. And when you start asking questions, they feel uncomfortable. They feel uncomfortable. So if you ask why you can't become a committee member, they will feel very, very uncomfortable. When you start asking about certain issues that go on in the masjid, they feel uncomfortable. And I think some of the examples that were given by you brothers was exactly what I have heard as well, and sometimes I have seen. So we have the marital issues, we have the business issues, we have issues around trust. And I think as generations growing up in the UK, so I was born in the UK, as we grow up next to each other and we have more mixing of communities and we talk to each other. And I think this is where the problem lies, that the generation who built these masajid, and they came from back home, as Brother Abdul Khaliq mentioned right at the beginning, everyone comes with their prejudice, and we all have our own prejudice. So they don't even trust, forget black Muslims, they don't even trust another Pakistani Muslim who's from a different area in Pakistan. They don't even trust another Gujarati Muslim who's is from Gujarat, but because there's a bridge in between this part of Gujarat and this part of Gujarat, so Baruch is here, there's a bridge here which takes you into Surat, we don't trust them because there's a bridge in between and there's water in between. Okay, so it's not necessarily about black Muslims per se. It's the brotherhood element of Islam that is supposed to be ingrained within our hearts and minds has been missing for a long time. And hopefully, I think the new generation, maybe the millennials, you might call them, are a little bit different than the elder generation. But the mosques that they were built by the elder generation, and they're still holding on to their particular positions. As you always, you call them the chair of the masjid. They don't let go of that chair. So that's what it is. They think, I'm the chair of the masjid. That means I have to hold on to the chair and remain the chair all my life. So unfortunately, I'm not saying it's right. All I'm trying to do is give a perspective of where it's coming from. And it's not only towards black Muslims, it's towards different Muslims. Pakistanis don't trust Bengalis. Bengalis don't trust Gujaratis. Gujaratis don't trust black people. Black people don't trust. And we have this problem within us as a community. And there are very few mosques like Lewisham Mosque, unfortunately. There are very few mosques like Redbridge Mosque, which is very, very diverse in its makeup, in its community, in its committees, and the way that people are involved. And the more we have them, the better it will be, but it will take time. And yes, it's not right that it should take so much time, but I'm just trying to give a perspective of where historically it's come from, and hopefully through conversations, hopefully it will get better. I'll just finish there, inshallah.
Jazakallah khairan, Imam Yunus. We'll obviously come back to discussions about that afterwards, but I'd just like to call Imam Swaleh to speak, last but not least, Imam Swaleh, who is the Imam of one of the Imams of Greenwich Islamic Centre. Bismillah. Imam Swaleh, yes.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulil Huda Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, amma ba'd. My thanks to you, Dr. Omar, and the panel. MashaAllah, this topic, in reality, it has been long overdue, and it's a good time now we're discussing these matters. And in reality, the moment you sent the email about this issue, the first thing came to my mind. It is just what Dr. Sheikh Yusuf Dudhwala said. And when Dr. Yusuf Dudhwala, when he was speaking about these mosques being established by the third generation, the generation that passed, and some of them are still here. What came to my mind while Yusuf was speaking was that, hang on, then even the board Muslim organizations that you find organization like a big organization, MCB, and talk about these big organizations. So you find they are dominantly by the blacks who are there just maybe serving tea, or they are cleaning the area. So you find, you see, this is something which has been there, which is there, and we don't expect that the next generation will still have that kind of mentality. That you find even elderly, an older person who is an age of 60, 70 years old, when he goes to a mosque which is not black oriented, he is seen as a violent criminal. He is seen that he is not a well-mannered person. So this is a problem that I believe that it goes down to the parenting also. And whether you are a black, Asian, white, blue, or red, I think it's something which we need now to come forward in this institution, Muslim institution, and say that this disease needs to come out, because it's very uncomfortable for an imam, for example, a black imam, goes to a mosque which is not black oriented, that you find that you are not treated the way another imam will be treated. We have seen in several places. You're seen, you're invisible, you're not visible. You covered, there's something which has covered you. Is it the color of your skin or what? People talk to you, people come to you and they tell you, Imam, I have been, I was in the college, in the university. I happened to have a relationship with a Muslim, not to that deep, but this Muslim girl who is from a different background, that I would like you to go and speak to their parent. But the way you treated you as an imam, a black imam, you find that it doesn't go down well. So in reality, that these matters are deep, and they're deep down to Muslim communities. And we cannot mention name that maybe is from the Asian background or from the Arab background. In reality, it is all over. In fact, I stand to say, even among the blacks, it depends on where you're coming from. There are some of the blacks, maybe from other parts of the world. Maybe you look at they may be Sudani background or Eritrean background, that they don't trust other blacks. So you find this is something that it is growing, and it is going deep down to the next generation, which is unfortunate. So schools need to have been a place whereby people will learn to fight racism. You find discrimination even is in Muslim schools. So these Muslim schools, you go to Muslim schools, maybe in part of the, in some areas like East London or in other places, you go and see how many numbers of blacks who are there. You will question yourself. You say, okay, does it mean they are not encouraging blacks to come to join the schools, or also staffs to be from the black background? So it's a topic that it needs a study, and minds need to come together. People need to sit down and see how we can remove this discrimination among ourselves. And I believe that we can stand tall and say that this problem will not be removed if blacks are not there on the board meetings to discuss about this. Look, only when issues come that we need to forge a united front, that is the time that all Muslims, blacks, blue and green, are brought together. But when it is time to share some these organizations, be CEOs of this organization, be accountants of this organization, go and see how it's happening. Another biggest problem, even in our social gatherings. Look, annual social gatherings. For example, Eid. Look at even Fridays. You just come out of a mosque and see you for yourself how people are sitting in groups, and you find that these are from a certain area, these are from a certain area. Even there are places that you go, you find this specifically for certain kind of people. So it is a disease that no Muslim will say that he's got this disease in his heart or in her heart. And we need to look as imams, as scholars, as teachers, as leaders, to see how we are going to bring it together. And I salute mosques like Lewisham are a very good example, because the history of Lewisham and other masajid is well known. Even our mosque itself, our mosque in Greenwich Islamic Center, it was an Asian oriented, but the moment when blacks, other people from the other backgrounds started coming in, they were invited in, and they were part of the management. But also much need to be done, because at times people also try to run away from that again. So you find that this is the problem with the mosques, that when a certain community takes over And I believe it's not in one place alone, in different other places. So it's something which needs to be looked into, because people may not speak wide, but in their subconscious mind, this is happening, and they are made to believe that it is okay. So you find people are blacks are believed to know that, oh, it's okay for a mosque which is, if it is an Asian background, it is okay for you not to raise your voice. You need to behave. So you don't need to front your head and bring it up. So it's something which need to be studied and need to be discussed widely. And conversations like this ones need to increase, because I can imagine if this conversation would have brought imams and scholars, or let's say, because most of the mosques imams are not the top at the top of the leadership. So imams are employees. So I can imagine if the institutions like the leaders of East London Masjid, the leaders of Regent Park Masjid, the leaders of this, they're brought together, we discuss this thing, and we give a unified statement. We take it outside there and we send to every masajid so that people will understand, because I think there's a lot of silence. There's a lot of silence. People are not speaking, people are quiet, they are holding their sides, and they want to thrive on the way they're siding. So these are a few remarks that I will chip in another time. Thank you very much.
Jazakallah khairan, Imam Saleh. So that brings us to the end of the first hour. I'm going to unmute everyone in a moment and allow them to talk. Jazakallah khairan, Imam Saleh, for your words, and for everyone else as well. One point that I wanted to put forward or suggest, and I wanted to get everyone's opinion on this, is that following some of these discussions, I feel myself that we can't separate the leadership of the masjids and the attendees of the masjid. And I think sometimes it might be the case that the imam and the committee, they don't hold these racist views, or they're very supportive of a multi-ethnic masjid. However, there's a difference between doing that and recognizing that your community may have those prejudices, and how proactive are you in addressing these points. So for example, the point that Imam Saleh mentioned, that some masajid did not start off so multicultural. They started off mainly Pakistani or Bengali or Indian, but eventually they became a mixed community. And one point I want to make about that, I think it's a very important point, because we find that people often travel to different masajid because they feel more welcome there. So it could be that Lewisham is known as a very, very accepting masjid for people from black ethnic background. And, I know brothers locally here in Ilford who've gone to Lewisham because of that kind of community feel. There are some masajid which are more open to converts in general. And so converts, whether they're black or from other backgrounds, they often go to those masjids. So my question really is to everyone here, and to our viewers as well, is that if you are in a position in the masjid and you feel that you don't have this discrimination, this racism, are you doing enough to try and promote the all-inclusive intrinsic nature of Islam, so that you make that, maybe that one black brother or that one black sister who's there in the congregation, if you don't hear anything addressed to them, but then on one occasion you hear the imam standing up and talking about the problem of racism towards black people, perhaps that one brother or that one sister will go away and mention it to others. Perhaps this is a way that we can transform our masajid to being more inclusive, more multicultural masjids. So this is one thing I wanted to mention. Is there a lot more scope for this? And I'm just going to unmute everyone here. Okay, so I think I need to unmute everyone individually. So
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
yes, yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so obviously hearing about the history of how, you know, the Asian community came over and started with the masajid and being of the first like Muslims to come to this country and to establish these masajid. We some of us know of a bit about this history and some of us don't. So I think that was good to hear that, because it gives context to what's going on, because some people might not understand. Having knowing this myself and having this context prior to this discussion, Imam Yunus, he did say something. He said, so, you know, the mindset is kind of still there. The mindset is still there amongst those communities. And if it's still there, again, to your question, is that it's not really being addressed. You know what I mean? It's not being addressed. And this is what I was saying when I was giving my piece of that. You know, these issues need to be addressed. And it's not just, you know, standing on the minbar, you know, and giving the khutbah on the Friday and expecting that to go home, expecting the attendees to go home, because we all know, and imams especially, you know, that some people are at the masjid, they're falling asleep, they're not even listening to the khutbah. You understand? Yeah, this needs to be something that is, you know, driven, and it's driven and it's driven and it's really ingrained into communities that look, this type of behavior is not acceptable, and it needs to change, and it needs to change from home. You know, it's not just, you know, it's not just something that happens in the masjid or outside. These are conversations that are being had from parents to children. You know, sly little comments, sly little behaviors, looks, gestures, body language. All of these things are part of how people grow up with these prejudices. This is how it all happens. You know, so things like this need to be addressed from home, from parents to children. Yeah, I do believe the younger generations are integrating a bit more, but still not as much as is necessary to deal with all of this. It's necessary to knock down all these barriers, all of these things, and just have it all flattened. Again, it's something that's far-fetched, if I'm honest with you. Yeah, and it's something that is that. And when I say far-fetched, I think for it to happen immediately. You know what I mean? I don't think that's going to happen immediately. It's going to take time. It's going to take work. So people from the black community need to have patience, but we can only have patience with progression when we know some things are in place and some things are happening. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult for people to have patience.
Can I just touch on what the brother just said also? Because I was going to address, can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you.
Because I was going to actually address that issue in particular, that there's been a lot of talk about what masjids can do and what the masjid can do and what imams can do. And I am kind of on the same school of thought as Mukhtar and what he just said. And I was going to say, when we address this, it will, if we really want to get to the actual issues, it is uncomfortable, because we understand and we know that it doesn't come from the masjid, and we understand that these are historic teachings, historic cultural teachings, and sometimes some of these teachings are coming from hundreds and hundreds of years ago until they just become folklore and traditions. And there are many people that have these ideas of black people that are coming from your cultural teachings. And these things happen at home, these things happen at some madrasas, even schools, and that needs to be addressed. It's not something that the masjid can do. If you've been taught from a child that black people were cursed by God to be the servants of humanity, because the curse of Ham, and Ham looked back on his father, and they take even biblical stories and they rehash them and they tell them, they retell them, and they speak of black people always in a negative light. And every film, because I mean, we grew up in a Western world. As I said, I've been a Muslim for 20 years, so I spent 20 years as a non-Muslim. And in this Western society, we see how European culture, predominantly white culture, portrays Black people. When we come to Islam, and we see all these different cultures, and we see how these different cultures portray Black people, not just Asian cultures, not just the Asians, it could be North African Arabs, it could be the Saudis or Arabs in general, it could be Asians. Black people are always portrayed in a negative light. So, for instance, if we talk about the whitewashing of history, people who are particular about lineage and have knowledge of everyone's lineage, and this is something they pride themselves on, lineage, but when they depict Black companions, Sahabas, not slaves, not Abyssinians, Arabs, and they depict them as white Syriac-looking Muslims, when if you do the research, they're not white, they're darker than me. And it's a deep-rooted issue. It's an issue that goes into scholastic issues, because you're now talking about people of knowledge. So, I mean, I remember watching a show that was on Islam Channel many years ago, and I saw a companion, and I know this companion to be Black, and he was portrayed as white. And we have to ask the question, if we really want to tackle this, where is this coming from? And why is that happening? Because it's definitely not by chance. And this is when it becomes uncomfortable, because it's a lot more, it's not just a case of a few ignorances happening between ignorant people because they're uneducated. Sometimes the education that they're getting is deliberately false or deliberately derogatory. And that needs to be addressed if we are gonna fully attack this issue. And as far as one of the brothers said that every masjid isn't like Lewisham Masjid, and I agree. But it's a very sad point that we as Muslims are trying to emulate the society of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we understand that society and what that society was like, and we are trying to recreate that society. And everyone, becomes very particular about the sunnah when it comes to, the length of a beard or where the trousers ankle should be. But the basic humanity and liberty of those Muslims is out the window when it comes to brotherhood, when it comes to diversity, intermarriaging, all these things. These things are not addressed. So there's a lot that needs to be addressed when we're talking about this. And we as Black people understand, and Mukhtar just brushed on it, that a lot of these things are taught from home. And when the Imam Shakeel mentioned that, the personal experience of myself with a brother in Birmingham who made the statement that Black people were made for the hellfire, I understood that he didn't originate that statement. I understood that that was the first time that he heard that, and he didn't just make it up to have an argument with me. It's something that was, whispered, passed around, that, even when we speak about the hadith of how mankind are made and from the different clays, and what some clays rough and coarse, and some clays smooth, and it depicts characteristics of people. We hear the whispers, and the Black people are the coarse people, and the Black people are the must have been the coarse clay, and all these kind of derogatory associations to being Black. We understood that it's taught, and we understood that it's quite deep rooted. So if we do want to tackle it, we have to be open about those kind of things, and we have to speak on those issues openly to people of knowledge. And only then can we then start speaking to people who don't have knowledge, because this is stuff that's been intertwined into the teachings of the Deen and the seerah of the Prophet and the stories of companions and things like that. And I think that's enough for me.
Just to add, as I was saying at the beginning, This is not a new problem.
Mhm.
At the time of the Prophet ﷺ, he came to a man and asked him, and he said that he'd come for his daughter's hand in marriage. And the man said, yes, the Rasul ﷺ was asking. He said, but the Rasul ﷺ said, I'm not asking for me. He was asking for a companion called Julaybib. And this companion was black. And the man said, the companion said, actually, I'm going to have to ask her mother. So they went to the mother, and they said, the Rasul ﷺ has come to ask about your daughter's hand in marriage. He said, yeah, it's fine, it's great. And then again, but he's not asking for himself. He's asking for Julaybib, this, black companion. It's like, again, it was a problem. And the Sahabi had to come herself and say, this is the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, who is asking, and he is the one who is proposing. How are we going to go against the order of the Rasul ﷺ, the suggestion of the Rasul ﷺ? So this is not a new problem. This problem was such, this ahadith that brother Abdul Khaliq was mentioning, these are fabricated from years ago, to the extent that there were scholars like Ibn al-Jawzi, who wrote a quite well-known book called Tanwir al-Ghabash fi Fadl al-Sudan wal-Khabash, wal-Habash, which was the enlightening of the darkness about the benefits or the virtues of blacks and Abyssinians. It's a well-known book from the past. As-Suyuti wrote Raf'u Sha'n al-Hubush, again raising the status of the Abyssinians, which was a common word for black people. This is not a new problem. Mashallah, there's a very good book which is more recent, written by Habiba Kande, again illuminating the darkness, talking about these issues that we've had for years and that we're going to have to find a way to deal with. And the thing about it is that unless we illuminate the darkness, unless we talk about this, unless we bring it out, unless we bring out the fact that actually people, sisters have had said to them, these are not black sisters have had said to them, your hair is black and curly, like black people. Maybe you should straighten it. That I have been asked when people said, can you think of somebody that my sister's looking to get married? Can you think of somebody? And I said, I know somebody who's Ugandan. It's like, no, I didn't mean that. Unless we talk about this stuff, and unless we keep talking about it, and it comes, as Mukhtar was saying, this comes from, and Abdul Khaliq was saying, this comes from many levels. It comes from the levels of the ulama to normal people in society. We have to keep talking, and we have to keep learning, and we have to, keep coming up against this roughness, because that's the only way that we're going to make it smooth.
Jazakallah khair. I think I'll just come in here. I think what you're all mentioning is so relevant and so necessary. But the problem from where I see it is, and I'm looking at it from my Asian community, who have quite a dominance over the masajid. And just to point out, I think what you said was very valid as well. It's Mukhtar mentioned it and Abdul Khaliq mentioned it. It's not necessarily only from the masajid, it's very much from the home. And I think one of the things that was pointed out after George Floyd murder was how all these Indian actors and actresses were all jumping the bandwagon of Black Lives Matters, and they themselves advertise for fair cream. Okay, so it's, and unfortunately within our Asian communities, if you ask any Pakistani communities, when they watch Pakistani shows that come on in Pakistan every morning, one of the segments is on health and beauty, and one of the health and beauty sections is usually about how to make their skin fair. So it's very ingrained within our community. So I think the problem from our side is that we don't talk about it, and that blame lies on me as well, and it's blame and it's on our scholars, and it's within our communities in general. And I think, as Sheikh Saleh mentioned, how many times has Sheikh Saleh been invited to a mosque which is predominantly Asian? Maybe it's never, maybe once, and I think that needs to happen more. And the more interaction that we have, I remember 25 years ago, I was studying in Egypt at the time, but I remember receiving a text message from a brother here. He wanted to bring Imam Siraj wa Haj to one of the mosques which was predominantly Asian. Okay, and I think this is not only about his background. I think there's also, and I think this is quite important from an Asian community perspective, the majority of the Asian masajid are Hanafi dominated. And I think they fear losing that Hanafi dominance within their masajid as well. And I think that's an element. And I think we need to point that out. So that's not racism, that's more about their sticking to the madhahib and feeling vulnerable, losing the madhahib element within their masajid. So I think that is an element which we can't count out. So I think when Imam Siraj wa Haj was coming, one of the mosques was hesitant in, so he was on a tour anyway, so he had his bookings already, but in one of the Asian dominated mosques, there was a request for by that brother. He said, look, I've got good contacts with the people who have brought him over, and we want him to do a talk here. And eventually he was able to get Imam Siraj wa Haj into that masjid. I gave him one advice, and I said, let him talk, but don't do question and answers. And it wasn't about whether Imam Siraj wa Haj was good at answering question and answers. It was about his maslak and madhab might be slightly different. And if he gives one answer which is different to all the people who are there, then after the talk of 45 minutes to an hour, where he would have turned up the heat of Iman within 1,000 people, the only talk after his talk has finished will be that one question which he answered differently to what people knew. And guess what happened? They allowed question and answers. He mentioned one thing, and that's it. Okay, but I think that's a story on the side. But what I'm trying to say is that the madhahib issue is a big issue for a lot of masajid, and I think we need to make sure that we don't threaten that particular element of the masjid. And secondly, I think the interaction has to grow. And from my side, I want to give a commitment that I will start mentioning a few things which will be uncomfortable within our community, within my community, as much as I can. I'll put my hand up and I'll say I've been hesitant. And sometimes my hesitancy is because I will say, well, things will change. Things will change. The generation is changing, and hopefully it will be a slow process, but it's an inevitable process because the generation is changing. The committees that were there, now the elders are moving on. The younger committee is coming, and they have grown up in this society. So I've been very hesitant. Although I've mentioned in a few talks, I haven't been very, very direct because I've been hesitant, because I would say if I say it, then that's the last time they'll allow me to come into the masjid, and then my voice is closed forever. So, you have these balances that you have to make, or the choices you have to make before you can. Now, I don't have to go into a masjid. Alhamdulillah, I work in the hospital, so I'm independent. But I think it's the influence that you have, which you don't want to lose on your community by saying something which upset them to a level where they stop you from coming and you speak to them and you don't have that influence again. Now, I'm not saying that's right. All I'm saying is that the balance from my previous few years, I would say, has been hesitancy. But after talking to you brothers today, I think I would be a bit more forceful. I think that, and I think, so one thing is the imams need to speak up a bit more. And secondly, we need to get people like Sheikh Swaleh and you brothers to speak to the communities and let them know how you feel. Because I don't think they realize, when you tell them Black Lives Matter, he says, yeah, I've got black friends. I mean, they're the same as a racist. I've got white friends. Come on, that's not good enough. It's not about having black friends. It's about being proactive. So, alhamdulillah, I'm so glad to be part of this, and I'm learning so much from you brothers, and I'm taking some notes for myself, for me to improve. But there's a long way to go, and I agree with you, brothers. There's a long way to go.
Just I will just add some sentiments here and there. And one of the things is that I think these mosques, which are prominently not dominated by blacks, I think there's one thing they need to realize, that they can be an answer to the social and problems that black African minority are facing on issues like poverty, homeless, lack of adequate education, Islamically, and on the other side, employment and drugs and violence in general. If there is a number that is there for a cake that has been cut for blacks, I believe that these mosques and these institutions, which are not run or dominantly by blacks, I believe that they could be an answer to the black and the black minority. So that is one threat that we are facing. Yes, there is some kind of violence, we can't deny, across all the communities. But when it comes to the black community, of course, we find some areas that black Muslims mentioned a lot on matters to do with drugs and violence, and also we can see even there's some kind of poverty in some blacks community. So these institutions can come forward and they can be an answer to this, because if they, we normally use Islam. We are brothers. Inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qaba'ila lita'arafu. Inna akramakum inda Allahi atqakum. Okay, so, but that one should be not taken literally. It has got a deep meaning in that. So it doesn't mean that we separate each other. It doesn't mean that we ignore each other. We don't point a finger that you see those boys who are on the street are from this community, are from the black community. So we feel that we are safe and they are not. So I have met a lot of people. I have met a lot of brothers from the black background and from the other backgrounds. And well, you see, there is a gap. There is a gap, and we need to close this gap. We need to close this gap. And to Brother Yunus, there is one thing that I would like also to put in place, and that is we find there is a chaplaincy, Muslim chaplaincy in the hospitals and everything. I don't know, have you surveyed and see how many numbers of black Muslims chaplains in the in NHS, and then you raise the alarm? So I leave it with you, and I will appreciate if I will be welcomed to your masjid. I will not answer questions. I will talk without answering questions. Thank you.
Shakeel.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Just a few points to add, inshallah, to the discussion. So, one issue, and don't take this the wrong way, Mukhtar, especially Abdul Khaliq. And, Abdul Khaliq and Mukhtar would say, look, I've been asking them to speak, not on this issue, but general lectures, other issues at the masjid many, many times. And there's always been, Abdul Khaliq, alhamdulillah, since last year, he's done a few programs for us, but there's been a reluctance in terms of speaking. So that needs to change, brothers, yeah? Because, to hear it from you, what you experience and what, sometimes and they've got kids, these brothers are married, they've got kids, what their kids might experience. And that's my biggest fear, that us as adults, sometimes we come across racism and, we're tough. You can handle it. And you might just kind of like say, you know what, doesn't matter. It's prejudice, it's ignorance and so on. But imagine that kid, I'm picturing him now, he's about 11 years old. Him being called an N-word by Muslims in a private Muslim school. What's going through his mind concerning Islam and Muslims? So very, very important, inshallah. We need to hear, inshallah, from others so it can be addressed. The other issue is, and again, don't take it the wrong way, this, my back term, Dr. Ahmed, in terms of microaggression, and again, to some of the points Mukhtar and Abdul Khaliq mentioned, I still think you brothers, us as well, Muslim generally, downplay racism. Yeah, we downplay racism. And of course, racism, as Dr. Yunus mentioned, different forms of it. But anti-blackness is global. You can go to any country in the world today. You can go to Egypt and see how blacks are treated. You can go to Saudi Arabia and see how blacks are treated. You can go to, Asia, see how blacks are treated. You can go to America and you see what's happening in America and see how blacks are treated. So the worst form of racism is anti-blackness. We need to kind of like accept that. Coming to the George Floyd murder, there were Muslims. There were Muslims who were very critical of any Muslim being involved with what's happening in America or kind of like racism. We're Muslim, nothing to do with us. This man wasn't killed because he's a Christian. He was killed because of the color of his skin, because he's black, and that's the color that Allah Ta'ala gave him. If we can't stand up for that and against racism, then there's an issue with this. The other point is, I think Abdul Khaliq alluded to this, this issue of, sometimes we like to blame our kind of like ills, that this is because of what happened through colonialism. Of course, colonialism is very problematic. Yes, racism became systematic and embedded in society. West African slavery really made it into kind of like a very complex situation until now. If you've seen this Netflix documentary, The 13th Amendment, yeah, please have a look at it in terms of what they're trying to say concerning the 13th Amendment and slavery. The criminal justice system in America is like a form of slavery. And in fact, the amendment actually states that if you commit a crime, we're allowed to enslave you. There are documentaries out there which I think is important for non-blacks to kind of like look up, because we have, and I kind of like, especially within our community members, tend to listen a lot and mix a lot, and learn a lot. So through Abdul Khaliq, Mukhtar, and others, America as an example, in terms of, there was this documentary on Netflix. There's a movie, but I watched a documentary about some youngsters, teenage youngsters that were allegedly, convicted or accused of raping a white woman in Central Park. They spent years. Yeah, there was one who was slightly older, and he spent years. And then finally, one guy admitted it was him, not from these 6, from others, and they were acquitted. Now, those years in prison, what went through their minds? So racism has become systematic. My point here now is in terms of before colonialism, as Abdul Khaliq was mentioned, was there issue of colorism? Was there issue in terms of racism? And I think Dr. Ahmed mentioned Imam al-Jawzi. There was a Jahid who wrote something in terms of the East African, they call it Zanj Rebellion. These were East Africans that were in Basra, in Baghdad, and they had a rebellion against the Abbasids. This is 7th, 8th century, well before colonialism, meaning there was a mistreatment of Africans or blacks in that time. So I think that historical problem needs to be addressed. We need to address it. Brothers need to speak about it. Sisters need to speak about it. Anybody facing it. And I'm saying, look, brothers and sisters, look, sometimes I even say, look, we are anti-white too. Yeah, That needs to be, why should any person of any ethnicity feel uncomfortable within the Muslim community? If we've got that guidance from the Prophet ﷺ, then there shouldn't really be a problem. And also, you know, saying, look, and I think somebody maybe lose some of the brothers, you know, they're coming from backgrounds, this and this, but are these things clear? I mean, ayats, ahadith, and imams are mentioned. The Prophet ﷺ's sermon, the last sermon, isn't that mentioned? Isn't it commonly read and understood and known? So knowledge is there in terms of anti-racism. It's now how do we put that into practice, whether it's parents, whether it's imams, whether it's masajid, whether it's Muslim organizations, whether it's others, whether it's on a community level. I think the issue is if we don't resolve it now, there will be splits and division within the Muslim community based upon these, you know, ethnicities and so on.
Okay, Imam Shakeel, I have got a question here from someone that's just sent it in. But related to that, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things that you mentioned also, Imam Yunus. I do think among the Asian community, there are different factors as to why there is this racism against Black people. And I think we are very, very tribal when it comes to race, when it comes to different ethnicities within the general South Asian community, within different madhahib, different jama'at. I think there is a lot of this, and I think this is a factor that exacerbates it. There was a brother that, when I was trying to put this list of speakers together, there were a few people that weren't able to make it. One of them was a brother of a mixed Asian and white background. And the example he gave was that, yes, although there is racism systemically against Asians and also Black people, I think, and he was coming from an academic background, so I think he came from a position of authority. He was saying that the way he thought about it was that on this ladder of, you know, social class and, you know, influence, Asians may be somewhere in the middle, but Black people, I think, you know, I think most people would agree are somewhere down the bottom. So we can either look at them as Asians, and I'm talking to, you know, my own kind of ethnic group here. We can either look down at them and think, you know, okay, well, at least we're not there, or we can actually say, what can we actually do to bring them up to our level so that, you know, we can actually tackle these issues together. I'm just going to come to the question now. Question for test for all of us, even the so-called enlightened generation. If your daughter or son wanted to marry a Black Muslim, how would you react? And I think that probably applies to, you know, a few of us here.
Yes. So
not necessarily for you to answer here. You know, it's just maybe to think about, is that something that we would consider a litmus test?
Yeah. So I think
I mean, I'm okay with it.
You got to ask the Black brothers if your daughter wants to marry a white brother.
White person.
It's got to be the other way around now.
Yeah. So just to you know, this question is not a. I don't see any problem with this question at all. I don't see any issue with this. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yeah, can hear you.
Yes, I don't see any issue with this at all. If my daughter wanted to marry somebody other than from her race or skin tone or whatever geographical longitude, altitude, whatever, I don't care. As long as, you know, they're Muslim, good character, X, Y, Z. I really don't care about any of that. This is something as a Black Muslim, when we accepted Allah's invitation to Islam, right? We were kind of made to abandon certain aspects of our culture and what we did and what we were used to. You get where I'm coming from? So dress codes and things like this, you know what I mean? We're not into it, you know what I mean? We're not wearing the clothes that we used to wear. We've got to wear this Arab clothes, this one from Yemen, this thing, this Palestinian scarf, this thing, that thing, you know what I mean? And you abandon everything from our culture. Yeah. Now, that's why I don't see questions such as, oh, would you marry someone from out of your culture? Whatever, because it's not an issue. And also coming to this country, I don't know, you know what I mean, I'm not the best educated about all the ins and outs of what happened with the, you know, with people coming in and out of the country and stuff like that, you know, but I do know that black people have never had a prejudice. So when the Europeans went into Africa, if we had a problem with them, then that would have been the last place they ever visited, you know. We've never had an issue with anybody else. So that is still the case. Why there are issues now, Imam Shakeel mentioned something before about building things exclusively for blacks, and then it just creates more segregation and stuff like this. The reason why that idea is surfacing now is because of the existence of other exclusive clubs, I like to call it, you know what I mean? And that's why that these things are surfacing right now. So that's what I say about that. Also, what I don't know, brother Omar, like, you know, when you just said about the ladder and things like this. I mean, I understand where you come from when you say it, but again, it's uncomfortable to hear that and to listen to that, because we don't want to be, you know, on anyone go up to this person's level or that, because we don't see anybody else above us or anything like that. I understand that that's how society has kind of put people at different places and whatnot, but we don't see that. And so if there was an effort to do as such as what you just said, and it was titled, you know, what can we do to bring people to our level, that wouldn't go down too well. So again, when it comes to what are we actually going to do to deal with these issues, constant interaction and constant communication between the communities, the different communities, needs to be happening in order to say the right things, to do the right things, and so that everybody is accommodated. Imam Yunus, he said that, I don't know, that, you know, sometimes if we say certain things, then that might be the last time you say it, and then your voice and your presence is ousted from the masjid. You no longer be there because, you know, you say something and then it upsets the committee or upsets the community and whatnot. And whilst again, I understand that, and we're forced to understand all of these things, which again is another thing that's not fair. I understand that, but you know, we're always upset at the end of every time we go to a masjid and we experience, you know, some type of prejudice. We're always upset. So it doesn't feel right that 100% effort isn't going to be given because of fear of upsetting some people. When we're always upset. We're upset all the time. And we have to be patient with being upset, you know? Again, I'm not trying to be difficult and trying to say, oh, well, you know, this isn't good enough. That things have got to start from somewhere. I'm just trying to make it be known that how we feel about the situation, because it's obviously got so bad that we can't make 100% effort straight away. Do you know where I'm coming from? It's obviously that bad. 100% for me, 100% effort needs to be given straight away, but it's so bad that we have to tiptoe, step on eggshells in order to get in, and then grease this person and slide this and that and the other thing in order to get a platform to say what needs to be said, in order to have the discussion and to invite and to be more inclusive. But yeah, to answer that question, I have no issue with interracial marriages or anything like that. And those other things were just to do with what was said before. Also, one thing as well, to put that microaggressions into context as well. That was just with regards to what I have experienced. The issue of downplaying racism, I understand where Imam Shakeel's coming with that, because I don't want to say I turn a blind eye to it, but personally, I think if I allowed it to bother me too much, then I don't know. You know what I mean? You have to kind of you have to kind of not allow things to bother you too much. So I know that it's greater than what I have said, but those microaggressions are what I personally experienced. And the word microaggressions, I say it's a microaggression because of what I judge things on my scale. So what I've experienced, somebody else might say, whoa, that's crazy. How can that happen? But me personally, it's not going to make me go over the edge because somebody did say this or did do that or whatever. Do you know what I mean? So that's what I mean by that. However, racism, the issue of racism in the community is major, and I don't want to downplay it whatsoever. I don't want to be seen to downplay it either, because I know it's a major issue. I wouldn't be here. Imam Shakeel said that there's been difficulty with me coming to speak about issues, but this one here, I definitely came to speak about it because of its severity, because I know it's a major one. So yeah, I'm not downplaying it at all, but yeah, just to clarify on that.
I'll just expand on what the brother was just saying there. First of all, in addressing the actual issue of would we marry the difficulty in the discussion and the reluctance in discussing this particular topic is what I want to address first. And what I'd like to say is that, as the brother mentioned, just the discussion itself, my first note that I put on my piece of paper is, why are we having this discussion? And the first thing I put next to it was sad. That it's sad that we have to have this discussion. And I think what it is with me as myself as a black person is that I don't feel it necessary to justify my existence, my race, and have to explain that I'm your equal. I deserve the same treatment as you. Black people are extremely proud. Furthermore, what is a black person? I remember we had this discussion when I was asked to talk about at Black History Month, and I was asked to speak. I said, a lot of black people don't even like to be called black. What is a black person? Who decided that every person from Africa should be called black? And I know there's a lot of black people from Africa who had never known or heard that they were black until someone else who wasn't black told them, you're black. We're not black. We are melanated, original colored people, and we come in all shapes and forms, and we've all been told when we come to the Western world, you're all black. And the Somali and the Nigerian and the Jamaican and the Brazilian, and no matter where you all are one people, and this is what you are, it's black. But the Bangladeshi brother, the Sri Lankan brother, the Yemeni brother, they're not brown. And the Japanese and the Philippines and the Chinese and the Cambodian, they're not yellow. So why are we black? There's many issues that we kind of have to discuss. So when we're asked to speak about it, about these issues, the first thing that comes to my mind is, why are we having this discussion? And I feel like I have to clarify many misconceptions about race in the beginning. And as I said, black people are extremely proud. We don't want to have to explain to people that we deserve a platform or an equal platform in the world, and point out that, look, we're not this bad, we're not the lowest, we're not the sick man of the world. And there's a reluctance also to make it look like we always need help. We need help. We need everyone to come together to help us. As I said, we're proud people. We will speak about injustices because it exists. And if you're true to yourself, then you're going to acknowledge any injustice, no matter what color it is. But we don't want to be, the sick race of the world, the sick race. We need everybody to come together to help the black man. We're not whatever the black man is, but we're not that. And we don't want to be associated with it. So sometimes, personally, this is where the reluctance to speak upon this particular issue comes from, because I feel like I am justifying a whole continent, really, of different people. So a wide array of vast different cultures, languages of people, and I'm explaining their relevance and why they should be treated equally and why they should be acknowledged and be looked upon on the same level. And that in itself is degrading and demoralizing. And Black people do notice that. So this is why there is that particular reluctance. And then even in the question, after this almost 2-hour discussion and everyone's spoken so well, the question that we've just been asked is, would you allow your child to marry a Black person? And the question brings home the reality about what we are talking about. Yeah, what we've been discussing this whole time. Because the way I interpret the question personally is, okay. We know about all of these ignorances, but let's talk about reality now. Let's come out of the theory and let's talk about things practically now. You, in your personal life, would you allow your daughter to marry a Black man? And in itself it's a negative question. No disrespect to the person who asked, because they probably didn't mean it in a negative way. But Black people are, we're not them people that wants to be known as the lowest of the low. And when all the dust is settled and we put all the political correctness aside, would you want a Black person in your family? Would you allow your daughter to be with one? That the question itself summarizes everything. It basically tells you everything you need to know about what we're speaking about. This is how we're looked at. We are looked at as, well, come on. We have because we've been hearing it all along as Muslims. Islam isn't racist. I mean, Bilal was the muadhin. Basically, we accepted you. We allowed you to be Muslims. We acknowledge the Black slave who was the muadhin. So of course we can't be racist. But that, in itself, again, is degrading. But we notice it, and I think it's come to a point now where, as the Imam was saying, where especially the younger generation, they're speaking upon it and they want it addressed. And I can completely understand that.
Jazakallah khairan.
Dr. Omar, just one point, inshallah. So in terms of the marriage question, to the questioner asked. So from experience here, in terms of being a large kind of like revert community in Lewisham, I can say the vast majority of reverts, converts, black or white, yeah. In terms of, when I say to them, they say, look, I'm looking for a spouse, could you help me? And I might say, what are you looking for? Is it specific ethnicity? It will be those brothers and sisters who will say, look, I don't mind. If it's a good Muslim, I don't mind. So I just want to throw that in there as well, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Imam Saleh?
Yeah, Yunus, you want to speak before me? Continue, Yunus.
Okay, so I totally agree with Abdul Khaliq in terms of the question and how it's been framed, because I've been involved in huge disputes and arguments where a Pakistani sister was going to get married to a Bengali brother. And I remember going to the house of the Pakistani sister, and they knew that I was coming. I'm the Imam and I'm a friend of the Bengali brother, and I've come to discuss the proposal which has been going on. He's been discussing, the families have been discussing for years. So when I'm brought there, I literally sat there in the house for an hour and they ignored me totally. And then after an hour, they say, oh, why have you come? I thought, oh my word. I mean, this is how we're going to get treated here. But, I think the issue is broader than just Black Muslim coming into somebody's house. Although I agree with you. I think, well, maybe, I don't know. I mean, sometimes Pakistanis might feel they'd rather have a black Muslim come into their house rather than Bengali Muslim. I think that's how sometimes the enmity is with the Bengali community. So I think, it's relative. And I think, again, it's about our deen, about our iman, about the knowledge within the community and the strength of iman as to whether they are looking at iman first, فَاظْفَرْ بِذَاتِ الدِّينِ, be successful by getting somebody who is full of deen, full of good akhlaq and character, or whether they are looking at it from a totally cultural perspective. And I've, alhamdulillah, I've told my children, you bring somebody who's a good Muslim in the house, doesn't matter what background. Alhamdulillah. So yeah, it's a bit broader than black Muslim only, but I think it exists within our communities and we need to work on it.
Imam Saleh, I think you wanted to say something as well.
My sentiment was only to encourage on the part of Iman, and because totally Sheikh Yunus said that Fadfar that Deen, the one we look on the religion side and everything. So the issue of intermarriage, in fact, this could be the source of bringing people together. And also, people should not see when somebody comes to ask a hand in marriage for your daughter or for your son, and then you look at the color of the skin. In reality, for Muslims are still dragging behind on that. We see other cultures, we see other people from who are not from a Muslim Asian background, let me put it that way. You find other people from the light skin color, they have totally surpassed the Asian in this issue. And most of the time you find that we Imams, we are faced by this issue, either a boy or a girl want to get married from either an Arab or either an Asian background. And that is when the Waterloo comes. And so it is a problem that sometimes it affects even for us Imams to understand what is really happening. And those are issues that definitely they must be addressed. We must shout louder as much as we can. And we want people to ask questions like that lady or a man who was just asked that question. Would you be ready to give a hand in marriage for your daughter or for your son, a black background spouse? Jazakumullah khair.
Jazakallah khairan. We have 5 minutes to go before we wrap up. So I just wanted to ask if anyone has any final thoughts to add as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, it's obviously we have to start the discussion in order to get the process going and the wheels turning and stuff like that. But what are we going to do? What are we really going to do? And that's what that's what I want to know. And I'm sure there are people that are watching or are going to watch that want to know that as well. What is actually going to happen? Because we've spoken about it. Some people were already aware of this from Asian communities, from other communities. Some people were not aware of it, so this would be an eye-opener for some. But for many, it's already known. So what are we going to do? How are we going to do? Otherwise, these are just words that are just going to fall.
Jazakallah khair. Can I ask one of the imams, or can I ask them to come in and just to add some suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, from my side, I think for me, because of the lockdown, it's going to be difficult to try and keep programs in the masjid. But personally, what I would do is something like this. And I know Brother Mukhtar was mentioning that it's one of the reasons why or was it Abdul Khaliq was mentioning that one of the reasons you don't want to speak about it is because you don't have to prove yourself, and you're proud. And I think you're right in a way. But then again, it reminds me of how we as Muslims are downtrodden, and we have to speak up sometimes, and we have to come forward, and we have to tell people who we are. It doesn't make it right, but it's the reality of where we are currently within the Muslim communities. Similarly, it's where we are with our relationships with within the inter-Muslim community. And I think we need to, it's about education. It's about educating our Muslim community and strengthening their iman in brotherhood, and making sure that it's based on brotherhood rather than based on culture and background. So from my side, I think there will be a few bayans and talks coming on this particular issue, and let's see if we can keep some programs as well. And hopefully in the very near future, I'll try and get Sheikh Saleh in one of our masajid.
Jazakallah khairan. Imam Shakeel?
Yes, just briefly, Sheikh Yunus, remember no Q&A for Sheikh Saleh though, yeah? Yes, so briefly, Mukhtar, in terms of 2 points to Mukhtar's query. Number one, Mukhtar, in terms of calling it out. Yeah, racism, oppression, wrongdoing, inshallah, whenever it's seen, whenever experienced as a community, and again, this is not just imams, as a community, as elders, as community workers, as imams too, we should be able to call it out and say this is something which is wrong, it needs to change. That's one point. The second one is, inshallah, it's about us as living our Islam, yeah, living and applying our deen, the deen of the beloved Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and putting it into practice. I think Dr. Ahmed mentioned, look, there was racism in the time of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He called it out, he rectified it, he educated it, and the Sahaba became, yeah, even those who kind of had an issue with it, look how they mended it. So it's about living Islam in a reality. Abdul Khaliq would know. Abdul Khaliq, we were out for dinner last night. Social distancing, of course, Abdul Khaliq, yeah? But we were out for dinner last night. And I mean, the brothers, all different races. And Abdul Khaliq can mention this. It becomes, the relationship is so close, it's color blind. Yeah, we surpass color and race. It's not even an issue. You can even joke about certain things because look, nobody has the issue of ethnicity and racism in their hearts. That's what we need to do, inshallah. We need to live Islam so we become, we're not seen. And at one point, it's like a lot of people are saying, look, Muslims, black Muslims in history, prophets and messengers, Musa alayhi salam black, others, Luqman alayhi salam black, great Ata, the great Imam of Mecca, Shir of Ibn Abbas, he was a leading scholar in Mecca, Ata, in the Haram, was black. But my issue here now is, look, our leadership and our history is not black. It's Islam, we're Muslims. Yeah? The Prophet was an Arab, he's our greatest leader. Abu Bakr was an Arab, he's our greatest leader. We need to come out of that kind of like saying, look, I am this type of Muslim or that type of Muslim. Muslim history, from Adam alayhi salam was a Muslim, to Musa, Isa, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is all Islamic history. If you're a Muslim, it applies to all of us. That way, inshallah, we become colorblind, inshallah.
I believe thank you very much, Imam Shakeel. I will add a little bit on that just before we wind up, and is that people also need to learn from others. We need to learn from others to see which are institutions that have crossed that bridge. So we are giving, there is a lot of things that are giving an example. We can give an example these days. People argue which is the largest mosque in London. Is it East London or is it Regent Park Masjid? So the debate is still out there. So do we learn from each other? Do we learn from each other? Do we learn from institutions? And the leadership is the most important thing. I believe Imam Shakeel had been, is an example, is a mosque which is given an example. I believe also the Red Bridge Mosque is also another good example. So do these institutions learn from these other institutions? So I believe that we not only make a lip service, but we learn from this institution and implement what other institutions have succeeded. We talk Regent Park Mosque, we talk, Lewisham Masjid has succeeded in this. So have we seen the kind of leadership is there in the Lewisham Masjid? Have we put that example and see whether we can succeed? Or we're just praising? We're just praising, but we're not implementing. So, and definitely, you don't expect that these successful institutions that have crossed that bridge, they crossed overnight. No, it is measures that were put in place. So I believe even individuals willing to learn from each other. We have seen Sheikh Yusuf has decided that he's going to do things differently. Have we learned from him something? So I think also lessons we need to learn from each other. وهذا السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Jazakumullah khairan to everyone that attended. It's been extremely enlightening to hear from each and every single one of you, each of you 6 brothers. And, you know, I do want to say that once the lockdown is finished, once things have cleared from that side, then I would like each of you to come to the masjid, inshallah. Some of you have mentioned, yeah, there are uncomfortable questions, and sometimes it's sad. Like Abdul Khaliq said, that we even have to address this. It is really, really sad, and it's demeaning for you brothers. Actually, it is. I and the team at Redbridge, we don't want this to be a tick box. We don't want this to be something that we have started just because it's topical. I think we decided to address this topic now because people have become a little bit more awakened. And so I think it's good to strike while the iron is hot. But we want to keep these discussions going. And I think it's important that, yes, as centers, we start addressing this, but us as individuals, we need to get to that stage where, as Imam Shakeel said, we are colorblind. Because when, you know, the issue of George Floyd comes up, when historically apartheid in South Africa was a problem, Muslims need to be the ones at the forefront, you know, trying to champion these kind of issues. So Jazakumullah khairan, brothers. I also want to ask forgiveness from all of you and from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if I've said anything that's incorrect. And, you know, I ask that you remember us in your du'as, as we will to you as well. And Jazakumullah khairan to everyone that is watching right now. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.